At Zone 214, Air France Flight 447 stopped transmitting. At Zone 218, the aircraft no longer existed as a coherent object, but the recording still behaved as if a next second were guaranteed. Not the aircraft, not the engines, not the crew. A flight recorder continued operating inside, a moment that had already collapsed. A device designed to document an ending continued to assume sequence had not been revoked. Sound kept arriving from a point in time where no cockpit should have remained intact. Something stayed active after termination conditions were met. Something behaved as if finality were optional. This is not an accident report. It is not a reconstruction of pilot error, weather, or automation failure. Those explanations exist. They have been written, debated, archived. This recording exists because something about the event refuses to behave like a closed chapter. Official history states that Air France Flight 447 departed Rio de Janeiro for Paris on the night of May 31st, 2009, and was lost over the Atlantic Ocean. The aircraft encountered severe convective storms. Ice crystals obstructed airspeed sensors. Autopilot disconnected. The crew faced a rapidly degrading situation. The plane descended. Structural failure followed. The ocean sealed the debris. But physical closure is not the same as temporal closure. A crash can end a trajectory while leaving an interval unresolved. And when an interval remains unresolved, recording does not necessarily stop behaving. What disturbed investigators was not what the black box recorded. It was how the recording refused to behave like it had ended. Vanished. AF447, the black box that spoke twice. The message that should not exist. A modern long-haul aircraft engineered around redundancy. The crew was trained for turbulence, for sensor failures, for automation dropouts, for manual recovery at altitude. The flight path crossed a region of intense convective activity over the equatorial Atlantic. Towering storm cells, ice crystals capable of confusing pitot sensors designed for ordinary atmospheric conditions. Between the final automated maintenance transmissions and the last confirmed signal, the aircraft remained internally coherent. None of this is mysterious on its own. What becomes strange is how the event feels when you remove the assumption that time must flow cleanly forward. The aircraft began transmitting automated fault messages. They arrived in sequence, with internal logic, not noise, not chaos. A structured cascade. Each message implied the system still believed there would be another moment. Each transmission assumed continuity. Then communication stopped, and the ending did not behave like a final sentence. It behaved like a cut, like a film reel snapping mid-frame. The sequence did not conclude. It detached. Aircraft systems are built on prediction. Every computation inside an Airbus assumes that the next second will arrive, not as hope, as requirement. Autopilot logic does not ask whether time will continue. It presumes it. Navigation algorithms, flight control laws, and alert hierarchies are structured around continuity. Even failure modes assume progression. A system does not prepare for time to hesitate. It prepares for turbulence, sensor disagreement, loss of automation, but never for sequence to pause without collapsing. When AF447's final messages transmitted, the aircraft's internal logic still behaved as if the future was guaranteed. No subsystem announced finality, no protocol exists for suspension, and that is the first fracture, not in altitude, not in weather, but in expectation. A machine designed to move forward continued to behave as if forward still existed, even when forward was no longer structurally available. When investigators recover black boxes, they expect a single thing, a single timeline: normal flight, escalation, end. The cockpit voice recorder captures voices, alarms, breathing, call-outs, the texture of human decision under pressure. The flight data recorder captures numbers, altitude, speed, attitude, control inputs, mechanical truth. Years after the disappearance, debris surfaced, then more debris, then eventually the recorders themselves. The first playback produced what the world expected: confusion, conflicting airspeed readings, a fatal aerodynamic state. The tragedy was devastating, but explainable. The report could be filed, the sequence could be closed, but something in the structure of the data refused to settle as finished, not because of what it said, but because of how it ended. Investigations depend on closure, not emotionally, structurally. Data must terminate, graphs must flatten, noise must decay into silence. An event becomes explainable only when it becomes past. When investigators listen to a cockpit voice recorder, they are not only listening for causes, they are listening for an ending. The final seconds are supposed to sound final. Alarms peak, voices rise, impact noise arrives. And then, absence. That absence is essential. It marks transition. But AF447's recording did not deliver absence cleanly. The termination behaved like interruption, not conclusion, like a sentence cut mid-word. And systems trained to interpret crashes do not have a category for interrupted endings, only completed ones. A black box is not a storyteller. It does not interpret. It does not speculate. It records. But recording itself is an agreement with time. 1 second must follow another. Sound becomes data only because moments arrive in order. The device assumes time behaves like a conveyor belt. But what if time is not a belt? What if time is architecture, rooms, corridors, compartments, spaces where systems remain active without exit? Inside the cockpit, nothing would appear broken. Displays still glow. Backlighting remains stable. The low electrical hum persists. A recorder does not know it is inside an anomaly. It only knows that sound is still arriving. The device does not require survival. It requires containment. And containment does not require continuation. The black box spoke twice is not a literal claim. It is a behavioral one. The device did not activate again. No new file was created. No second recording began. What changed was how the existing sequence behaved. During later forensic analysis, a segment emerged that did not align with the known arc of the crash. Not as a separate recording, but as a behavioral inconsistency inside the preserved data. The timestamp fit. The file structure was intact, but the content did not belong. The cockpit sounded procedural, checklist cadence, routine callouts, measured breathing, no escalation, no alarm cascade, no acoustic signature of loss of control. Investigators did not describe panic. They described normalcy without context. The segment did not behave like before, and it did not belong to after. It behaved like a moment encountered again without restarting the event. The black box did not speak twice. The interval failed to close once. If AF447 entered an interval, the crew would not experience it as time travel. They would experience continuation without resolution. Altitude numbers fluctuate without converging. Airspeed values disagree, but never settle. A checklist reaches its final line, and immediately feels unfinished. Hands return to the panel because nothing confirms completion. Memory cannot advance because nothing becomes past. Inside an interval, time does not pass. It accumulates. Pressure replaces flow. Human cognition is built for resolution. Even stress seeks conclusion. Fear peaks and releases. Action completes or fails. But an interval offers neither. Inside non-resolution, the brain cannot assign meaning. Effort does not convert into outcome. Decision does not become consequence. The result is not panic, it is cognitive drag, a sensation that something essential is perpetually about to resolve. Hands move not from urgency, but from incompletion. Attention narrows. Repetition replaces escalation. This is not terror, it is suspension. And suspension is more corrosive than fear because it denies the mind an ending. A crew inside such a state would not scream. They would repeat, quietly, methodically, waiting for a confirmation that never arrives. If the event remained stored, the question is not why it returned, but how access became possible. Storage is often mistaken for isolation, but it is closer to suspension. A held interval does not vanish from the system. It remains positioned just outside active sequence. Layers coexist without interference until conditions allow alignment. Alignment is not dramatic. It does not announce itself as a rupture. It appears as a minor fault, a hesitation in signal flow, a sound registered where silence was expected, a procedural echo detected without context. These are not anomalies of content, but of placement. A seam forms briefly between layers that should not meet. Not everywhere, not constantly, only where structure thins enough for contact. The black box does not initiate, it does not decide, it does not speak, it remains passive. The contact occurs because the present brushes against what never fully exited. The world listens because something remained close enough to be heard. Aviation investigation is built on closure. An accident occurs, data is captured, the sequence ends, and analysis begins. Finality is the foundation that allows meaning to be extracted. A recording that behaves as if it contains more than one moment violates that foundation. It suggests that the event did not fully transition into the past. Not that it repeated, but that it never finished becoming memory. The so-called second message is not a transmission. It is not evidence of recurrence. It is residue, a remainder of duration that failed to collapse into a single endpoint. Something remained structurally adjacent, unassigned to before or after. This is not proof of continuation. It is proof of incompletion. The system behaved as if an interval was left open, not active, not advancing, but still present. Sequence and structure are often treated as inseparable, but they are not. When progression fails, structure does not automatically dissolve. An event is more than movement through time. It is configuration, systems, interfaces, human routines encoded into procedure. These elements do not require a future to remain coherent. They require internal stability. Inside an unresolved interval, coherence can persist without direction. The cockpit does not need time to advance to remain intact as a state. It needs balance. A stable configuration can exist without outcome. Instruments can remain logically aligned. Voices can retain procedural cadence. Behavior can continue without destination. Structure can hold even when sequence collapses. And when structure holds, traces can remain detectable long after motion has ceased. After the final transmission, silence was expected. Operational silence, the kind that follows resolution. No data, no sound, no continuation. That is how crashes conclude. But what followed did not behave like true absence. It behaved like containment, like a space recently vacated where pressure has not equalized. Silence arrived, but not cleanly. It carried shape. Silence with structure is not emptiness. It is suspension. The absence retained boundaries. The system did not close. It stalled. And when silence carries form, it is no longer the end. It is a holding state mistaken for completion. Machines can preserve suspension. Humans cannot. Human memory requires an ending to assign experience to the past. Without closure, experience does not settle. It accumulates. Pressure builds without narrative. Fear requires anticipation. Panic requires escalation. But repetition without exit produces something else entirely. A weight without emotion. A sensation that something essential is perpetually about to conclude, yet never does. Time without exit does not feel endless. It feels dense, heavy. Unresolved duration does not stretch, it compresses. If consciousness were held inside such a state, it would not experience terror. It would experience inertia, awareness without progression, presence without release. Intervals are not sealed vaults. They are positioned adjacent to the present, separated by structure rather than distance. Most remain untouched because alignment never occurs. But alignment is not temporal. It is structural. When interfaces resemble one another closely enough, boundaries thin. Inside the recorder, systems remain powered just enough to maintain coherence. Buffers hold. Status indicators persist. No new data is written. Nothing advances. The system waits without awareness. And in rare moments, a fragment behaves as if recalled without memory being invoked. Not as communication, not as signal, as contact, passive, directionless, proximity made audible. Leakage is not intention. It is adjacency briefly exposed. To disappear is not to exit. Exit implies resolution, a completed transition from active sequence into memory. Disappearance implies interruption, a cut without closure. Flight AF447 did not exit cleanly. Its trajectory ended. Its structure did not fully resolve. What remained was not motion, but state. A configuration preserved outside progression. The aircraft ceased to move through time, but the event did not fully leave it. Disappearance leaves fragments unplaced. Exiting leaves none. Flight AF447 is catalogued as a tragedy that ended in the Atlantic, but the Atlantic is geography. The true boundary is sequence. The aircraft broke apart. That is established. What remains uncertain is whether the event ever completed its transition into the past. A recorder does not stop when sound ends. It stops when sequence resolves. This one did not. Time does not erase uniformly. Some moments dissolve completely, others persist, intact, contained, accessible under rare conditions, waiting without decay. Waiting without awareness, waiting without conclusion. The black box that spoke twice is not an anomaly to be explained away. It is an indicator. Some intervals never stop recording.